Yo, what's that? No way.
That's pretty fucking good.
Look, it's in the corner too.
So I painted a mural on my wall. I wanted to start off with this robot as the centerpiece and then build out from there. As you can see, I've got some wires going off to the left to expand the current template. The first piece I'm going to work on is this head I just sculpted. For this design, I'm going for a girl, cyborg, silicon-based lifeform, batteries not included type beat. You can see here I'm taking a massive chunk out of her head. I'm scooping out the eye socket on the right before I add more volume to the other eye. The way I do this is by placing a sphere in the place of the eyelid and then remeshing it to the face to combine it with the rest of the mesh. I then sculpt out the creases and the finishing touches. Then for the eyelashes, I use a plane with hair particles. Then I do some basic styling to make them look more natural. It pays off to have all the sculpting and human details out of the way first. This lets me solely focus on the hard surface robot details. Right now I'm modeling this cast around the eye socket. I'm then subdividing it to give me more geometry so I can play with the shape a bit more. At this point, I'm left with the job of filling up empty space with something rather than nothing. I'll change a few things here and there, like adding more wires and deleting things I don't need, also refining the design of things I've already made. I end up turning the recess in the neck into a disk drive, which I end up simplifying further when it came to the final painting. The final render is done in Workbench with one of the default matte caps turned pink. This allows for my render to have realistic lighting without having to mess around with real lights in my scene. And now comes the part where I start penciling things on my wall. So at 2 AM, with the projector out, I start roughing in the outlines with a pencil. I keep blocking the light from the projector with my arm so I can see the line work underneath. Back in the robot scene, I threw my new render in behind the original. This way I can have them in the same image and then line them up in the projector. In the camera, you can increase the sensor size or the FOV to fit new objects into frame. Make sure not to change the position of the camera or else this might end up distorting the image. I love Lego. And luckily for me, I've already made Lego in Blender before. I just needed to repurpose my old models to make me. I know. I've already been gifted a Lego minifig by one of my best friends, and it looks exactly like me. Everything from the white t-shirt to the sweatpants, which in hindsight appear to be the only clothes I actually own. So I'm using the decal of the minifig as reference for making the neck piece on the final model. I learned that there is a fine line between Lego V-necks and Lego cleavage. Small changes, big difference. I decided to replace the hair on this model with a hat instead. So I could just place my finished Lego guy into the image, but I still wanted to do something special with it, something more Lego. The Lego Manual Minifig Exploded View. After matching up my model with the reference picture, I render a lit, colored model and a white overpass with dark outlines. I then overlaid the two renders to combine them into one. Since the projector can't cover the entire wall at once, I keep having to move it around, which wouldn't be such a big deal if it weren't for the fact I have to zoom into the image when I project it. Since the default Windows picture viewer doesn't allow accurate zooming, I use this free program instead. It comes in handy having already rendered the outline pass, as I can just trace over the back parts. To make a Mobius strip, you start with a curve object, in this case a circle. We'll split two adjacent points to create this hole, then reorient the open curves to resemble a circle again. Take a mesh plane and scale it into a rectangle and remove the face. Convert this into a curve object. Assign the rectangle as the bevel for the curve. Extrude the endpoint of the curve to close up the circle. With proportional editing set to linear and connected only, press Ctrl T and twist the curve upside down. Convert the object to mesh, bridge the open ends, and like, what am I actually going to do with this? I guess I could just, to make a Mobius knot, do everything the exact same, except make a triangle. Turn the triangle into the bevel object, twist the vertex points, you get the idea. When we're roughing out something as complex as a hand, we want to start off with a simple base with all our fingers and joints each set into place. Taking as much time as you need doing this part will save you so much later, so you don't have to go back and correct the shape of things once you've joined them all together. At this point, I give the object a bevel just to round it off and give it more geometry. Once I've approximated the shape of the hand, I go in and sculpt it to give it more smooth details. After sculpting the first hand, I spent an embarrassing amount of time on the second before realizing I've already sculpted a hand before. So I took the first one and I flipped it. Now I just had to carefully adjust the original pose to fit the one underneath. After smoothing things out and adding details like creases and wrinkles, I was quite happy with what I got. I finally remeshed the Mobius knot and the two hands together, and I smoothed out the joint in sculpting. And to finish things off, I just added fingernails and a material, and we were done. I call this the Mobius grip. Okay, honestly, I can't even explain this next one. This is the notepad entry. Don't ask what this means. I just woke up and had this incredible idea. I need to stop watching hentai. So I had a great time throwing together my virtual PC. Largely the process was just replicating real world components and figuring out where to put them. The real challenge here is making components that are recognizable, but not too detailed at the same time. I started the recording halfway through modeling everything, so at this point you're just seeing me make the final models for the piece. I had an idea in the back of my head what I wanted to do with everything, but I wanted to make all the components first and then pose it in my scene. Once I'm done modeling this heatsink, I end up having the components dangling out the box with the tentacles holding them up. You'll see in a second there isn't much to show for that, it was just a bunch of trial and error, and the final composition kind of looks alright. And here it is in color. I have basically never painted before. Sure, I've used paint before, but never for my own project. So I needed to find my bearings first. I decided I'd paint the Lego first, as there isn't much detail and finesse required. Just some coloring, some basic shading, and a big smile. What made this one so straightforward in the end was the fact that each part was so easy to mask off with tape. With every straight edge, I could just tape that section off and just go wild with the color. When it came to painting the legs, there were some issues. Different parts of each surface catch the light differently, and therefore would create these minute differences in shading. To my right, you can see I drew over the render. I labeled the image with numbers representing each value I wanted to paint in. This did take a lot of focus to execute properly, but although it was tedious, the outcome makes up for all the planning. With the pink head, it was a similar struggle when it came to the shading, working with a bunch of similar colors in a really small area. The thing I took away from this one was to place colors on top of each other and gradually get darker. It's easier to paint everything light and keep getting darker as you paint. To break down the areas of color, I ran the original render through a couple fillers. I did this to recognize where the major spills of color are, and so I can identify the shadows too. The Mobius grip was probably my favorite piece to do from start to finish. The 3D was fun, and the painting was super relaxing too. There was some planning around the shading that needed done. I drew around each different tone with a pen tool, and referenced it when I was painting each layer. Next came the most tedious part of all, the Octo PC. On the surface it looks kinda straightforward, as there isn't much color and the sharp edges can just be taped off. But the real struggle with this one was managing all the shades of grey. This diagram is me color coding every different shade of grey into its own color. Here's a trick I did to put the holes in the back of the case. If there is anything I regret doing, it's the color on this painting. The two main colors other than grey, red and green, are a nightmare to work with. As a final result, this one probably isn't my favorite, but I'm okay with it. Slapping in the base colors, a nice blue, we've been here before, there's nothing new here, we're just painting. just like before, we do the lights first, we get darker. I'm just doing the details, little creases here. I think I saved the best for last. There's so much I could just mask off here. The rest I could paint freehand. Simply put, this was a breeze. I didn't really care much in the way of blending colors. I wanted to keep them quite bold. At this point, going back to the source material, recoloring each wire so I can identify which one's which when I paint. The last real thing I have to do is paint this tree. I'm not going crazy, I'm only using 2 colors, I'm barely adding detail. I just need to distinguish each branch and then connect it back up to the wires. So at this point, I've already finished editing the video. I still feel like the wall was missing something. It still feels a bit blank in some places, but I think I know how to fix it. This is the finished wall. I hope you enjoyed. Take care.